So I hope that's okay. Because we'll put it on the social media platform. As I said, we had a couple of sessions initially at the beginning of the year, but it was on a very ad hoc basis, and I realized very quickly that I needed to improve my organizational skills a bit before rebooting it. But we have rebooted it. I'll give a short introduction on the seminar series for those of you who don't know too much about it, just so that you know how you can be involved. And then I'll hand over to two very interesting speakers who will give short presentations on papers which they have developed. So this is a seminar series which started out from Working Group 2. So Working Group 2 on the cost. Sorry, I should take a step back. We have a cost action program on the intersection of age, culture, work, and digitalization, and how new technology is impacting both negatively and positively on older people in spheres mainly of work, but also of other cultural factors. And we've got a number of working groups. We were looking at various aspects of age and digitalization. So there's one working group which is looking at it from the perspective of older people themselves. There's one that's looking at it in terms of public policy. There's one in terms of culture. Our working group is focused on age, digitalization, and employer policies and practices. And so how are organizations, how are employers using new technology? How are they producing a more inclusive workplace for older people so that they can embrace technology rather than see this as a barrier to work? And how are policies and practices being developed within sectors across Europe? If you'd like to be a part of the work of this working group, if this is something that interests you, especially if you're a person specializing in HR, then please get in contact with Lada, who's on the line, who's the chair of the working group, or me, and we'll be very happy to include you. One of the things that we're doing right now is developing country profiles of employer policies, and these are going to be short pieces. I think it's 3 A4 side papers talking about employer policies and practices in different countries. And the idea behind this is that the country reports would then be useful to the group as they develop papers, publications, whatever else, either papers specific to their own country or across comparative studies. So you can look at the UK study, which I'm developing with a couple of colleagues, and another country. And if you want to look at some of the institutional factors which either enable or create barriers for older people in terms of using digitalization, then looking at employer policies, these short papers can be at least the starting point for developing a paper around that subject. We don't have every country right now represented in terms of the country profile. So if you're really keen to produce a country profile of your country, please do get in contact with us. We'd love to have you as part of the team. In terms of the seminar series, this is something that is the first Wednesday of every month. I think initially I tried to make it the first Wednesday of the Wednesday of the first week, the first full week of every month, but that became too convoluted. So if it was like, say, the 3rd of April, well, that's not a full week, and therefore I excluded that. But it'll just now be the first Wednesday of every month. 1 o'clock to 2:30 Central European time. So that's 12 o'clock UK time. Just do the math based on wherever you are. Every seminar has 2 speakers. So it's about an hour and a half. And the way that the time is divided is you have 2 speakers. Each speaker has about 15 minutes to talk, followed by 15 minutes of discussion, and hopefully not a full half hour, but a little bit of wiggle room for any announcements that I or Lada have to make. As I mentioned, we've gotten a little bit better organized with this. So a couple of weeks back, we circulated a questionnaire asking people if they'd like to if they'd like to speak at the in the seminar and their topic. So we've got almost a full list here. Not only did we ask if somebody wanted to speak, but we also asked if you were interested in somebody else speaking that you could nominate them. So if you see your name there and it's a surprise to you, don't panic. Just get in touch with me. If you'd like to speak at a future session, but you're not sure the time or you're not sure at what stage you'll be able to speak, then please get in touch with me as well. I'm sure we can fit something in. The other thing about the seminar series is that it's meant to be a platform for everybody. It's not just people who have papers which have already been published, although I think that's the case in the session today. It's also for those who have working papers, things that they're developing. It's those who have initial ideas that they want to bounce off of an audience where you have critical friends looking at the data and the conceptual framework which you're developing. It's also for people at all stages of your research. So could be for people who are more established, like the two speakers today. It could be for early career researchers or even PhD students. In my last job at the University of Hull, I was the director for the PhD studies for the business school, and this program is modeled after something that we did in the business school, in which we gave PhD students an audience to talk about their research. And one of the reasons behind that was that we found that there were a lot of PhD students who were going into their viva with no experience of talking about their research to anybody other than their own supervisors. And that put them at a real disadvantage when it came to the viva, not because they didn't have good research, but because they didn't have experience and they didn't necessarily feel comfortable about talking to their research to an audience. So if you have a platform like this, it gives them the opportunity to do that. The other thing as well is in my new role at Leicester, I'm the head of department, and one of the things that I have to do is to approve requests for conferences, people taking part in conferences. And one of the questions that I always ask when somebody makes a request for being involved in a conference, especially if it's the other side of the world, is have you presented this paper to another audience, an audience that you can get without having to go halfway around the world. So if you've got a paper that you're developing, you're really keen to present it to a conference, this might be a good platform to get some initial feedback of your paper, so that when you do then ask to go to Australia or Japan or wherever else, you could say, well, I did present this paper to this particular platform, and here's some of the feedback that came from it. It's open to everyone. It's not, obviously, it's not just working group 2, it's any working group. It's not affiliated speakers, it's practitioners, whole range of people. So please do get in touch with me, matt.flynn@leicester.ac.uk. And I'll be very, very happy to accommodate you. And if you've got somebody else that you'd like to nominate, for example, you've got a PhD student, you're really interested in having them present to this this platform, I'm very happy to talk with them as well. In fact, I think the next session, I've got two really good speakers who are both PhD students of mine. One of them has been doing work around digitalization in supply chains in the garment industry, and has a really interesting perspective in terms of developing a case study around a single organization and looking at how institutional factors influence the company's policies. The second one, and I think this is even more, it shows the complementarities of the different activities in this cost action program, had a couple of weeks ago taken part in the systematic review training in IASI, this great program, which is really useful for her as a first year student, because she's doing her literature review on her research. But what came out of this, which shows absolutely fantastic outcome for a training session, was a working paper that she's developing with two colleagues, who also two other students who were also, or two other participants in this training program, who the three of them used the training that they got from the systematic review to then produce a paper on age and digitalization. So we'll hear from them in the next session in July. So with that, I'll just pause for a second to ask if there are any questions that anybody has about the seminar series generally. If not, I'll hand over to the first speaker, who's Anđelka Stojanović of the University of Belgrade, who's going to be talking. We have two papers which are both on the acceptance and the use of digital technology amongst older people. One is looking at it from an employment perspective, and the second one is looking at it from more of a cultural and social network perspective. But they're nice papers to juxtapose against one another. So I'll hand over to Anđelka, who will talk about her paper on digital literacy and employment of the older population. So I'm going to then stop my share screen and pass it over to Anđelka. If you can turn your screen on, if you have slides, then we can now see them.
Thank you, Professor Matt. Just a second. Okay, is the presentation visible to all of you?
I see it, yep.
Okay. Thank you again for this opportunity. I also want to thank all attendants at the seminar today. I see a lot of familiar people here, but however, I'm going to introduce myself again. My name is Anđelka Stojanović. I'm assistant professor at the University of Belgrade Technical Faculty in Bor, Engineering Management Department. I'm going to present the paper that was already published in the Book of Proceeding of International May Conference on Strategic Management that took part 2 weeks ago. The International May Conference is a conference with a long tradition. It's organized by my department, and each year conference gathers distinguished scientists and practitioners from strategic management and related disciplines. The paper is entitled, as I said, The Influence of Digital Literacy on the Employment Rate of the Older Population. The paper is prepared by my colleagues, Professors Isidora Milošević and Sanela Arsić and I. Why this paper and this topic? Recently, we started to explore different types of digital divides, and as one of notable divides appeared to be the digital divide caused by age. Therefore, within this cost action, we focused on discovering some issues that older population facing during the use of information and communication technologies. And as a result, we prepared this paper with aim to examine the relationship between the level of digital literacy and the employment rate, and to determine whether there is a significant effect on the employment of the older population. Why this is so important? First of all, the intense changes brought by ICT development have significant impact not only to the science and to the industry, but also significant consequence on economy and society. The second, one of today's particular problem is population aging, and this is the challenge by itself. According to the United Nations, by 2050, 1 in 6 people in the world will be over age 65. This trend of aging population started in developed countries, but recently also this trend can be observed in middle and low income countries. Today, largest share of the older population is still in Europe and Northern America, with almost 19% of population aged over 65 years. In this projection made by United Nations, it stated that in, for example, Asia and Africa, the share of older people will be much smaller than in Europe and in America, but also the trend of rising that number is evident. In most European countries, retirement occurs between 60 and 65 years of age, or even 67. And when we speak about that fact, we must take into consideration population in age 55 to 64, because they will be in employment for another 10 years. So monitoring the current level of employment rate is important not only as a research topic, but it is important for present, and also it is important for the future. Also, this increase in a share of older people force companies to redesign products and services, and also that can be some opportunity for them, and they could take some advantages of this situation. However, when we speak about that influence on employment and on business, this growing demand of older people pose additional challenges to the company's management. Younger employees grew up in an environment that is already changed by digitalization, and they connect with ICT technologies much earlier in the early stage of life, so they expect to use the digital technologies in the working environment, and they certainly easily adapt to these new changes. However, older employees are less comfortable with these intense changes and this intense digitalization of working environment, and they must take additional effort to acquire adequate skills for performing their jobs. So also during that process, the older population often faced with discrimination, with prejudice, negative attitudes, and also in some cases with digital exclusion. Nevertheless, there is a large share of labor force that is mature or older, and older employees, and they cannot be just excluded from the business process. Therefore, the specific challenge is growing demand for specific knowledge and competence, and with that, the new level of literacy is constituted with the name digital literacy. Digital literacy or ICT literacy refers to the necessary extension of traditional literacy. It's defined as the ability to use ICT technologies, to use information, to develop skills for using digital device, and to develop critical thinking, to assess the value of information, and to do it with a certain awareness of security issues that occurs with digitalization. So also UNESCO proposed their own definition that is pretty much the same as this one I already told. What is important issue for older people is that digital literacy affects all spheres of lives. For example, digital literacy means that the older people must be able to perform financial transactions. So in that way they must be to achieve financial inclusion, because their daily activities nowadays depends on that. Also, when considering some services provided by governments, also technological and social aspects of that must be evaluated. First problem here arises with because the older population's ability to use ICT. On the other hand, with aging, they need to use various services has been increasing, and in recent time more and more services are actually offered in digital form. For example, I have opportunity recently to speak with one professor from Slovenia, and he told me that, for example, their medical care system is almost completely digitalized. So the people, if they want to schedule an appointment with to the doctor, they need to use platform. First step is, for example, to make to sign in or to create their profile there. They need to register, to fill different forms, and also later they need to sign in and also to fill different forms. And he told me that this is very, very difficult for older people in Slovenia, because they are facing problem with they don't have devices, they don't have knowledge to use that, and that is very frustrating for them. And also they exclude some percent of people the opportunity to reach medical care. So when we speak of employability, the literature that connect digital literacy of older population and relations with employability is quite limited and inconclusive, and therefore we actually tried with this paper to fulfill at least some part of this gap in literature. I will try not to speak too much about statistics and methodology, but I need to explain something what we were doing to get these conclusions. So we used the data from Eurostat database from 2091. And we took the 3 age levels, 35 to 44, 45 to 54, and 54 to 65. And we used data series on 37 European countries. As a measure of digital literacy, we used 2 components, level of computer skills, and second one is the evaluating data, information, and digital content. In addition, we use the measure a way of obtaining ICT skills because we think that it is the factor that also significantly influencing the employment rate. So on this table you can see the list of indicators that are used to measure those measures. For example, measure level of computer skills, we use the 9 indicators, like for example, individuals who have copied or moved files between folders, devices, or on the cloud, downloaded or installed software or apps, etc. For the second measure, we use the second measure, evaluating data, information, and digital content. We use 6 measure indicators, such as truthfulness on information or content they found on the internet, on social media, and the way they can check the reliability of these sources. And the third measure is a way of obtaining ICT skills with 5 indicators, and that is indicator that showed us how people get the different trainings in ICT. We performed the principal component analysis with the entire sample. The task of principal component analysis is to show us whether those indicators in the table is in aligning with the measures. So basically that means whether the indicators adequately describe the measures. So we use principal component analysis to explain the variability and to determine the reliability of proposed measures. After that, we use the results of that step to calculate the regression factor scores with each entry in the table in the starting data, and in order to finally, in order to determine the influence, but also to determine whether is existence of difference based on the age group, we defined 3 models and use the multiple regression analysis. You can see on this slide that that basic model for that regression equation. The employment rate here was used as a dependent variable, and 3 measures I already mentioned are used as independent variables. I will also skip the numbers, but I want to point out the results. The first, by conducting PCA analysis, the results indicated that the data are adequate for conducting this analysis. Also, the high percent of variance explained indicated that a high share of variance of measures is explained by those suggested indicators, and the high values of factor loadings also indicated that these indicators give a considerable weight to the selected factors. Also, the reliability of measurement scale was confirmed by Cronbach alpha. For those who are who perform analysis with statistical tools, they know that this is very important when we try to analyze some phenomena, because that is proof that the questions that asked question adequately describe the phenomenon that we want to analyze. Furthermore, multiple regression analysis is conducted with those data, and in this table you can see the results of multiple regression analysis. So model 1 was the model with data that are connected with the age group 55 to 64. The value of that R square is 0.328. That means that even 32% or almost 33% of variability of employment rate can be explained by those factors of digital literacy. Also, this is confirmed by these values of F test and this significance, and that proved that digital literacy actually has influence on employment rate in age group of 55 to 64. As you can see on this table, for another two models, for age group 45 to 54 and 35 to 44, that R squared, that variability explained by digital literacy is very low, but also there is no significance in those data. So with the further analysis, we also checked which of these measures has the greatest influence, and independent variables in the that independent variable, that is a way of obtaining ICT skills, is the only influential factor. What all these results mean? First, these results mean that we proved that there is influence of digital literacy on employment rate of older population. Also, we proved that there is differences between this age group when we compared with other two groups. And also, we can conclude that the way of obtaining these ICT skills is the most influential factor here. These results and also the results of previous research indicate that disadvantage of older population caused by ICT can be significantly reduced by education, influenced by education level, and reduced by trainings. Therefore, learning can be considered as a key element in aging society. So the older population should be encouraged to increase digital literacy to various training, whether provided by employees or independently are undertaken by the older employees. In short term, can be said that ICT development negatively impact the employment rate of older population. However, long-term speaking, employees can failure to deal with older employees because they can, how to say, they missing out by failing to include the older workers in that digitalization process. They missing out the benefits of that employees because they have valuable experience. They already share the values of the company, and they are very loyal employees. So that is why is necessary to encourage older people to develop new skill and to stay in the employment. For this, it is important to develop such products and resources that will help ICT, that will help older population to learn easier or to use the ICT in easier way. Also, all of this must be supported by development of appropriate policies and in that way, all these activities, all this action will significantly improve their life. For more detailed analysis in this research, in this topic, it is need to observe more on personal level this influence of digital literacy on employment, because in this research we didn't consider aspects as gender, education, and other demographic characteristics, but certainly that would be the one of the things we will planning to do in the future research. So thank you for your attention, and that is all.
Well, it's really interesting. I've got a couple of questions, but I'll open up the floor first to see if anybody has any questions or observations that they want to make. I'll tell you what, while we're waiting for others, please do raise your hand if you have a question. I had a kind of a burning question that I thought was really interesting, was where you showed the impact of digital literacy on employment of the three groups. And it looks like it's only the older group where that has a significant negative employment outcome, or at least has the biggest one. And I was wondering about that, because I would have thought it would be the opposite, that most young people know, most young people have a very high level of digital literacy relative to the older population. And they'd probably be able to do all of the things that you talked about, probably be able to access their bank account online, probably be able to take part in online training if it was available. They'd probably be able to homework and so forth. So I would think that those who, if you've got a young person who isn't able to do anything like that, they would be at a huge disadvantage relative to other young people who are able to use new technology in the way that the rest of the population does. I was wondering if you have any insight on that. Why you think that it's not significant? The relationship isn't significant. There's a very small significance for the younger population, but not the older.
As I said in presentation, because I think that is because the younger populations are already accustomed to use digital technologies. So maybe that is not so influential as in the older population. Yes, when we look at young population itself, there is certainly disadvantage on those people who doesn't know how to use ICT technology. But in this research, with these questions that are asked, the results is like that.
But I would have thought that if you've got a young person who isn't able to use technology in the way that most of us are accustomed to on an everyday basis, that must indicate some significant social or economic disadvantage. You know, they've never had a computer in their home, or you know, they've never had a mobile phone, and that would put them at a much bigger disadvantage. Whereas an older person who doesn't use internet banking, for example, well, that it's a bigger part of the population that doesn't use the technology, but it wouldn't necessarily indicate some social demographic factors. Whereas a young person who isn't able to use technology, that might show that it would be a tiny, I would imagine it'd be a tiny part of the entire population that doesn't have that digital literacy for the younger group. But of that tiny population, I would think that they would have a real disadvantage relative to others in terms of finding and maintaining a job. or maybe they just get into work where they'll never need to use the technology.
Yes, I agree with that completely.
Let's turn it over to Justina.
Hi, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. I just have one kind of a question on the indicators, because you mentioned towards the end of your presentation that actually the most impactful, the most one of the, the set of the indicators which explain the variability were the ones related to the way older persons obtained their digital skills. I'm not sure I got it right, but I think this is what you very shortly described at the end.
Yes.
And this is what I am interested in. So what could you just elaborate a little bit on because this is quite relevant for, I think, the policy making schemes, the way the older person obtain their skills. So
yes, this measures is consisted of several measures, several indicators, and I think it is interesting because in some other literature sources I found that people with a higher degree of education or older people who used to use digital high technologies in their working environment are much easier adapt to new technologies. So I think that this is important because maybe those people have some doubts in order to learn new things and new technologies, and maybe it is why that factor came as the most important influential factor. You know, this is the beginning of research, and there is still, for me and for my colleagues, there is a still question that we need to go further and to do more detailed analysis. As I said, I think that for you know, when you use Eurostat database, you already have defined questions. So in some next phase, we maybe need to create our own research with concrete questions that are of our interest. So maybe we will have the more and more detailed answers.
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much.
Ariana?
Yeah, hi. Thank you very much, Anđelka, for this interesting presentation. I enjoyed it a lot and learned also some new things. I was curious to ask whether through your study you came up finding any specific policy or strategy that maybe companies or even the government is working on or has already established in the country related to the digital literacy in the intersection for this group of workers.
Well, in this, thank you. In this phase of, in this stage of our research, we first try to find patterns and indicators that already exist. Because I must say, I'm from engineering management department, and we are somehow focused always on the data, on quantitative measures. So until now, we analyzed only those measures. We are planning to work on that report, country report, and in that case, we will look for that policies in our country and made by government or by companies. For now, only this quantitative research.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Anybody else have a question that they'd like to ask? Can I ask just one other question about the definition of digital literacy? And I'm sure there's there's an article or there's something that would explain the methodology. Is the definition of digital literacy a dynamic one, in which the metrics of determining whether somebody has digital literacy, does it change from year to year? I mean, I could think that if I were to take a test on digital literacy right now, I would probably score, very high. I don't know how to make a TikTok video. That's probably the only thing that I would score low on. If you were to ask me the same set of questions 5 years from now, and how it relates to employment, there would probably be a lot of questions around use of AI, for example. And I might struggle a bit, and I might be more reflective of those older workers in the second group. How does the definition change over time?
Yes, the definition has been changed, but also the data has been changed. For example, I use Eurostat data very often, and they had like a DSC index of digital society index, and first DSC index has 5 measures. I think in 2021 they changed DSC index because of changes that occur on daily basis, and they changed the indicators and they changed also the measures. So yes, it is changeable, and I think also for this digital literacy, because of that I said that the data are from 2019 first. And I think that in the future it will be changed also for business. Now we have questions about Industry 4.0, big data, open sources and something like that. For example, there is no data before 2020 because they didn't even make such kind of research.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think there was a study which was done on the definitions of generations a couple of years back. One of my former colleagues, Emma Perry, did a piece on that, and basically what they said was that the typologies of generations, which we're all familiar with, the baby boomers, the Gen X's, the Gen Y's, the millennials, whatever else, is pretty irrelevant, especially at a global level. But they said the one thing that was relevant is the digital divide. How old were you when mainframe computers were being put on everybody's desk? And we thought this was amazing. This makes a lot of sense. And there are, you can see differences in employment patterns, but probably the introduction of AI is going to have as much, if not a greater impact on people's employment, something that we're struggling with at Leicester right now. As we have students who are using AI, on the one hand, we want to have a policy to make sure that people aren't using it to cheat, that what they're writing is their own work. They don't just put a question into ChatGPT and see what answer comes out of it. But then on the other hand, we're trying to develop some really good skills for the students, recognizing the fact that AI is probably going to be a very big part of their work in the future, and we have to skill them so that they're able to use this in an effective way. All right. Well, thank you so much for that. I'll now turn over to the second speaker, who's Marianne Afanafisa. Sorry, I've worked with Marianne for years when I was at the University of Hull, and we have the distinction of when I first started with Hull, I was Marianne's boss. And then a couple of years later, Marianne was my boss. So we've got a unique relationship with one another. But Marianne's going to be talking about a paper that she did on the use of digital assistive technology and older people's use of it, but also trust formation. So I'll now hand the floor over to Marianne.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I'll wait for for me to be able to share my screen. Yeah.
So, Anđelka, if you could shut down the share screen on your end, and then Marianne can turn it on hers. Yep, there we go.
Yeah, great, thank you. All right. Let's be this one. Right. Okay. Is it coming up?
Yep.
It's quite funny though, because I can now see everybody, but I have to go to a different screen to see my screen. Okay, so right. I'll keep the side bit on. Well, this is a paper that it's already been published in Telecommunications Policy, and what it's based on really is it's quite interesting that we have a contrast here between cross-cultural sort of analysis and data set and a focus on a particular country, which is this. It's a nice contrast because it's not only a focus on a particular country, but it's also using different research methods. So it's a qualitative study and it focuses on Finland. The project that was led by my colleague and friend Marina Vek in Finland, in Hämeenlinna, was originally about the desirable future for aging people, perspectives and business opportunities for the assistive technology. And this project was funded by the Finnish Foundation for Economic Education. So they basically were looking at a wider issue of assistive technology and how to enable people in Finland as part of the European Union to stay in their homes, stay in situ later on into their lives, so that they are enabled by assistive technology to be independent and not to rely on social care and care homes and things like that. So it's a very interesting sort of perspective, and kind of the issues are affecting all European countries and all countries all over the world. So how to use, and their particular focus was on digital assistive technology. So, when Matt mentioned this thing about pressing the button, the panic button thing, as it's called here in the UK, that's one of those elements. The other element is using tablets and smartphones and being able to get hold of your doctor online, being able to get online help and things like that. So basically, it does link in a lot with the digital literacy aspect of it. But for this particular paper, what we wanted to focus on is the issue of trust. And why trust? Well, because that's what brought us together. Marina and I met at a conference way back, in EGOS conference in Montreal. Can't even remember when that was, but 10 years ago, I guess. And that was in a trust sub-theme, session. So both she and I are interested in aspects of trust. And we just thought, well, how can we analyze, how can we assess whether the adoption and the use of digital technology by older people, surely it is affected on certain levels by trust, by their understanding and their perception and their trust of this type of technology. So that's what we tried to do. We tried to extract and get the material from that wider project, from those interviews, and you know, obviously, since we had this idea of including trust, then in the data collection, trust was part of that data collection as well. So, so when we sort of thought about it, we thought, what would be the main research problem here? What would be the main research issues? Well, the research question that we thought were most pertinent to this context would be, how is older people's initial trust formed with regard to technology adoption? And secondly, what factors, specific factors, affect the formation of older people's initial trust in digital assistive technology? Okay, so obviously this kind of brings us more into the research and area of trust, and thus the kind of approach and the levels of analysis are something that we were looking at here. What we focused on mostly is the different bases of trust that have been already established in the literature. So a kind of general definition of trust would be a leap into the unknown. Yeah, you trust something or somebody because you're basically, it's an unknown. You cannot know whether the thing that you trust or the person that you trust would renege on that trust, would do something that you didn't expect them to do, or something like that. So we kind of looked back on how do people trust? What do they base their trust on? And the basic elements or basis of trust are personality base of trust, which is you have a tendency, a propensity to trust somebody because you're that kind of person. Cognitive base of trust is more related to the reputation that the other person or the other thing that you're going to trust or not trust has. So your initial knowledge about something and the reputation that aspect holds. Calculative base of trust is more to do with whether you basically you do the costs and benefits analysis of what happens if you trust something or somebody and it actually all goes badly wrong. Yeah, so you do that subconscious calculation. Well, it is claimed that people do that subconscious calculation from time to time. Yeah, and it's of course that this particular aspect comes from more of a transactional kind of transaction economics kind of background. So the different bases are based on different aspects of like more sociological analysis, more economic analysis of this phenomenon. And the last one, which is very important, we thought also for the specific issue of technology, is institutional basis of trust. And the institutional basis of trust is the foundations are basically how do you understand the system that is surrounding the technology use and whatever. Is the system working all right? Can you trust the systems to operate properly? Can you trust the people who operate the systems to operate them properly? Do rules and regulations, safeguards exist, etc.? And also specific elements like which is called situational normality, which is basically understanding that something is normal, that in typical circumstances, things are expected to function well and things are supposed to work okay. Yeah, and that is basically based on the idea that you understand that there's benevolence, so goodwill on the part of people operating the systems and creating the laws and regulations, competence, that they're competent to operate these things, and obviously their integrity, which is their ethical stance that they are not going to do something to the detriment of somebody else. And so this is the kind of this element of situational normality. And on the other hand, the other element of institutional basis of trust is the structural element that regulations, guarantees, legal aspects are there to protect things working as they should. Right. So based on that, then what we did was we looked at specific. We had to gain access to specific people to talk to them. We had focus groups and interviews, and we developed questions based on these on the basis of trust and how people perceive technology, specifically digital assistive technology in those within those categories. And initially, we did Marina did a pilot study, which was looking at 3 Finnish municipalities, and that was way back in May 2018. So it was in the cities of Tampere, Hämeenlinna, and Parainen. And we just wanted to test our questions, test the whether they actually understood what we were talking about, what we were trying to get out of them. And based on that, then we developed the main study, as we called it in the paper, the main qualitative data collection. So the collection of data was happening between November 2018 and February 2019. And we did several things. We did focus groups, and that was in towns of Tampere and Kerava. And so that was four group interviews there. And then 3 group interviews were conducted in Hämeenlinna. And Hämeenlinna is the place where Marina's university is based. So that was quite handy for her. Overall, what we did was we covered 41 older adults, and so 26 of them were women, 15 were men. So altogether there were 7 focus groups, and this the size of the focus groups ranged from 4 to 8 participants in each group. The focus of where we actually got those people was the access was possible through having spoken to people who were 50 years or older, who lived in independent houses, facilities that in Finland they call senior houses. So these are privately owned condominiums or rental apartments for those who are 55 years old and older. So the individual face-to-face interviews were also carried out. And what I wanted also to mention here is that we were looking at people of 55 and older, and we distinguished 2 subgroups of younger age groups, which were 55 to 64 and 65 to 74, and then the older age group, which was 75 to 84 and above 85 years old. So we then were able to obviously record, translate, and transcribe the data. We were using the usual coding and analysis of the qualitative data. And what we then came up with was the sort of subsections of, I'm not sure how, I think I might try to put it into a larger thing to, can I create it a larger thing? Start from beginning now. Can you see the the table at all?
I think if we look very, very closely, we should be able to see it.
Yeah, because I'm
you
trying
can also
to
try to press from the
yes, this one. Yeah, the presentation thing. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's better, isn't it? Yes. So so we identified specific kind of issues that came up within the different bases of trust, and some extra factors that were that we saw were affecting how people related to technology and their trust, specific trust in this kind of technology. So obviously the positive trusting beliefs in human nature is like, a lot of people felt that they were, you know, that they had this aspect that if the technology is there, it must be created and for their benefit, right? It's so there was this element of positive attitude towards the technology based on their initial kind of stance on trust, as if they trust the human sort of, if they trust people in general, then they're likely to trust the technology as well. Also, then what we identified was the functionality of the technology products and the related services and systems. If it was felt that the functionality was good and that everything was working fine, then the trust was quite high. And the other aspect was, to a certain extent, also linked to some of the elements were kind of linked to each other, because the technological advances and helpfulness of the technology was also linked to whether they understood this aspect from their surrounding networks of people that were helping them nonetheless, even though they were living independently, especially the older group of between 75 and above 85. The sort of their relatives, their friends, who may be younger friends, who had experience of using technology, and their kind of you know, their referrals that they received from them also kind of affected this. If they were more familiar with the cognitive aspect, if they were more familiar with the technology, and that's, again, that links to what we heard in the previous paper about the digital literacy and the younger sort of age groups being more accustomed to using the computer at work, to using tablets, to using smartphones. They were more open to the technology because they had the cognitive familiarity with using the technology anyway, and then they could only see a benefit if the same technology or different elements of technology were used for their assistant, to assist them to be independent in their houses, and maybe not to go to the doctor, but to do a consultation online, or to order prescriptions online, or things like that, you know, so that kind of aspect. Also the reputation of the technology, and that would be gleaned from their sometimes this would also be gleaned from the, even though they were living independently, some social worker input was sometimes relevant, because sometimes social workers would come and visit them and you know, sort of make sure that everything is fine. And if that technology, or a particular technology, was recommended by these people, the professionals, then it would be more likely to be trusted and potentially adopted. Okay, so I'm also aware of the time, and I don't want to spend too much time on this, but basically what we did was we identified these different levels, these different aspects within the different bases of trust. And the obviously the I'm just going to go back, sorry. I'm just going to go back to the other things. So the ideas behind separating the trust into different bases of trust and then identifying different factors within that was also interesting because we had some variation in the age groups in terms of what they were telling us. I decided not to put any of the quotations in the presentation here because that's easily gleaned from the paper itself. But what we found was that some of the things were quite intuitive anyway. As I said, so if you are within the younger age groups of older people, then you're more likely to adopt certain types of technology. If you are older, then maybe not so much. But also what we found is we had a slight differential between the urban and the rural areas. And within the rural areas, there was sometimes the issue of not just digital literacy, but digital democracy, right? So you had areas which were either very well supplied with Wi-Fi and internet connection, and some not. So that's also an issue. And of course, this brings up the general issue of availability of digital technologies across the society, not necessarily just vis-a-vis the older population. Yeah, so you have the divide between the poor and the very poor and the more well-off people who can afford spending money on, quite sometimes investing in higher speed technological connections and things like that. So there were these kind of variations. Now, it was good to talk to people. It was good to get their understanding, but obviously, qualitative research is valuable because it gives certain kind of in-depth and interesting findings. But then, how do we know that they're representative? Yeah, how can we test them? So we felt that getting the qualitative data and talking to people allowed us to understand better the concerns, but also provide some basis for propositions. And these propositions could be then used for generating further hypotheses that could then be used for wider testing on a wider sample of people. So as a kind of taster of the findings, what came out very strongly was, for example, that within the age groups we also had kind of people who were more active in terms of their use of technology and those people who were less active. So we called them digitally active. And for example, with regard to use of technology in urban and rural areas and sort of use of going by the referrals and things like that, we found that digitally active respondents from the younger age groups living in urban areas, they mostly relied on the technical characteristics of technology. They were more interested in the technical characteristics of technology. And this increased their trust in the technology. And potentially, of course, increasing trust also means that you're more willing to adopt the technology. So they would get this more technical knowledge because they were more used to online forums. They're used to word of mouth referrals, but word of mouth referrals were more kind of appropriate for older generation. Yeah, they would talk to their friends, they would talk to the carers and the kind of official carers and the family members who are carers, etc. Whereas those who are more active obviously would look online as well for more information. So so that was an interesting aspect. And then the reputation of technological, the brand that actually was used, that was important for digitally active younger age groups. And as opposed to, for example, older groups, where it's the reputation of the organization providing the support and the retailer that was more important. So they were trusting more those institutional structures that were advising them on the use of technology, rather than looking into the technology itself, right? Which kind of makes sense, but still, it was interesting to see that. The other aspect that was quite important on the institutional side, which is, again, it mirrors everybody's concern, I think, is the concern about the security of personal health information. So the more digitally active and more attuned age groups, obviously, they had more of an understanding of how this information could be misused, and they were more aware of these security issues. But nonetheless, they still, along with the older sort of groups, they shared beliefs in the integrity, benevolence, and competence of the healthcare service providers. So that was an important aspect. And I think that is an aspect that could be tested across different countries, because it seems that this level of trust in the institutional system, in the institutional aspect of the healthcare providers and the healthcare system overall, is very strong in Finland. I can tell you it's not very strong in the UK. Now, this is from more anecdotal evidence, not sort of, I haven't been looking deeply into that, but with all the scandals and everything with the NHS, it's been quite a rocky ride, especially after the pandemic. So yeah, so that aspect could be interesting to look at as a cross-national sort of comparison. And this aspect of being confident in the existing institutional system, and the what makes things normal and okay to operate in, and this idea that you know, the systems, the way the society is organized, the rules and regulations are there to protect you and to support you, etc., etc. So that's quite an important aspect in this context. With regard to sort of extra aspects that we found, one was the this idea of self-efficacy. So the ICT self-efficacy is basically a perception on the part of the user that they are able or not able, or unable to understand technology, or able to use it, etc. So it's basically the kind of confidence in using technology. So this kind of confidence and self-efficacy was more prevalent, which is not surprising, more prevalent in the younger age groups, and especially from the urban areas. And that affected their positive initial trust in technology. But all the participants had less confidence and had a more had a lower ICT self-efficacy. Now, some people were completely older, from the older generation. Some were completely rejecting any kind of use of technology and didn't want anything to do with it. That was another aspect as well. So that presents a challenge. Also, those representing the older age groups from both urban and rural areas, and that was irrespective of whether they were digitally active or inactive, the digital divide was raised as a strong concern, because they were very concerned about on the one hand, the cost of this digital assistive technology, but also they were concerned about as they called it, equal availability. Now, what that means is having access, having equal access to this technology, whether you are living in an urban area or whether you're living in a rural area, and depending on which social background you're from. So that also raised some issues, and this also can sort of bring us into a wider discussion about the digitization of society and how that is democratic or not democratic, etc. So out of all of this, what we then thought would be useful propositions to look at and sort of implications, because the implications of the research really are that in order to understand whether you can propose certain technology and expect older people to use it or not, what we need to take into account is whether they initially trust this technology or don't trust it, and how can we improve the situation, the conditions whereby people would trust the technology in order to adopt it. So the propositions that we put forward is, so by considering the identified factors affecting the formation of initial trust in digital assistive technology, older people's adoption of technology can be markedly improved. So our sort of proposition here is that you have to try to understand what affects the initial trust formation, and that would improve the adoption of this technology. And also, it's the socio-demographic characteristics of the that also seem to affect the technology process, the technology adoption process by older people. So it's these two aspects that we would be glad to see that could be developed further, that could be tested further in wider studies. Okay, so I think I'm finished here. I'm just dot on the time. I'm not sure if we have time for questions, but hopefully we have a few things that can be mentioned.
Thank you so much. Let's have maybe about 5 or 10 minutes for questions for those who are able to stick around. So Lotta, I see that your hand is up.
Yes, thank you very much. Coming from Finland, of course, this is hugely interesting, not only because of the topic, but also because the context is so relevant. This is really, really interesting. Thank you. And it does resonate quite a lot with our research here. We have a project called Equal Care. It's a four-country consortium where we collect data, and we are doing this so-called PAR method. So we have participatory action research where we have older people, older adults involved, and technology is very central here, and we have two groups that meet often, and I think that the one of the key issues that has been raised during the whole project has been the question of the very fast digital development. I mean, Finland has, of course, now like decades of the digital development, where started the first digital strategizing in mid-90s or earlier, possibly even. But during the pandemic, especially, I mean, your data was now from 18.
Yeah.
We see that also the countries that weren't as developed as like our research groups have defined, for example, Germany which is one of our countries, not very much, have taken huge steps. But Finland also in some ways have maybe argued for the digital development and the sort of okaying that by the pandemic. So one of the key things are the digital services, doctors, banks, insurances, that we are actually discussing in each of the meetings, and it's very strongly also in the data, because you had the division of the different categories, and we haven't done that categorization, but I think it's like very close. I would say that it's quite close to, and it partly has to do also with the age where people have because we noticed that it's a key thing if people have used ICT in their work while they were active in working life. So the age division, of course, also the ones who are now like 80 plus have maybe less. They of course have used some kind of ICT at work, but we also find that the people who are a bit younger are more like more actively involved in the sense that it's like part of their everyday life in a different sense. So I find this a very important study, and I'm going to read the paper absolutely, and I hope that we can discuss further at some point, because I think there are a lot of, I don't have a question to you, this is just a comment, but there's like a lot of many things resonate here, and we haven't explicitly talked about trust, but I think this is something I'd like to raise with our respondents also, that it seems like an important thing. Thanks.
All right. Any other comments or questions? If not, first of all, thank you everybody for staying over. I'll try to be briefer. Oh, sorry, Ortenka. Oh, sorry, you're on mute.
Excuse me. Hello, everybody. I heard the study, and it was really a good study and very interesting. I think that it's very important to do like this study in our countries, because it identified very well what factors are very important for us to work with the others. For example, with elders, to do training or to identify the factors that can motivate them to do and to be productive in their works. So it was very interesting, and it's that's effect in our work to do again like this study for to identifying the factors that affect in our works. Because digitalization in these times is very important. Most of works now are going to do in the home, so it's very important to know these factors and to do how to help, or what are things that can do difficult, not productive our work. Thank you.
Oops, I just saw a message from that Marianne sent to me on WhatsApp. Apparently, there's been a power cut, so that's why she went offline suddenly. But do get in contact with her. I put the link for the paper, for both papers, on in the chat box, so you'll be able to see both of them there. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for coming today. It's great. It's great relaunch. I'm really pleased to have such a great attendance. And thank you for two really interesting and nicely complementary papers that were discussed today. When we heard the second paper on Marianne's work on trust formation, I was thinking back to before my mom passed. I was trying to get her onto Facebook because she had some mobility issues, so she wasn't able to get out and about as much as she was in the last year or so of her life. And suddenly I got a friend invite from one of her friends, one of her high school friends. You know, so they'd been friends for the last 50 years or so. And every once in a while, when I was at home back in America, I would have I would be on Facebook, and my mom would see her friends, a post come up from her friend, and she'd like look at it, and I kept saying to her, well, get your own get your own Facebook profile. You'll be able to keep in contact with all your friends. But I was never able to succeed. I think in part because my older sister happened to work at Harvard at around the time that Mark Zuckerberg was a student there, so she knew all of the sort of nefarious going on in terms of his business practices and everything. But I kept saying to her, I was like, well, listen, she just wants, you know, I'm just trying to get her onto Facebook to get in contact with her friends. She's not going to join Oath Keepers or anything.
I'm back. Sorry, I got disconnected.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, we're just coming to a close now.
Yeah, sorry about that. I got my power was down.
Ortenka is going to get in contact with you about some ways that we could look at country comparisons in terms of the research that you had in terms of trust formation.
Yes.
Right. Okay. Yes. Great. Well, I'm sorry, Charlotte. I didn't. I got cut off from your last question, but I understand that you're saying that you, that you're doing similar stuff, and
I can send you an email at some point and send you something that we've published. So
well, I'll put the reference of the paper in the slides as well, because are you going to put up the slides?
I put the two papers into the chat box, so anybody who wants to have a look can look there.
Okay, great.
The video of the session I'll pass to Natalia, and she'll put it onto the social media platforms, so you can. It'll be accessible to everybody, and we can.
Okay. Well, do you need my slides? No.
No. It'll show up in the recordings anyway.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah. But please do also join our cost action program. There are slots available. So I think I sent you before, but I'll send again the website for it. So I'd be very happy to have you join in. And I think you bring in a new perspective as well in terms of your research on trust, and which is an interesting dimension to the work.
And Hortensa, you are from where?
Albania.
Albania. Okay, great.
Yes.
Fantastic. Excellent. All right. Okay, good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody, and thank you for two great talks today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
much. To be in your
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.